memorials and plaques to American soldiers who had fought in France. We met there briefly and spoke, and I learned that he had fought with the Army's 45th Division. Now, the 45th, as you look on your placemat, was originally the Oklahoma National Guard, and it originally included National Guards after Pearl Harbor from Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, those southwestern states. Later on, there were a lot of replacements and so forth, and I'll stop there as far as John Russell, but this video shows fighting in France, northern part of France, and on into Germany. Where the 45th landed was southern France, and then on into central and then southern Germany, and I'll tell you more details on that after the video. But this is general action of France and Germany, similar to what John Russell saw.
Winter was approaching. Other Allied armies were feeling the pinch. The Third was ordered to hold up, to take the defensive. Nothing but defeat itself could have made the general more depressed. This was a difficult time for an army built to roll. The tension for Patton was finally eased. He was assured by his old friend Ike that eventually the Third would receive adequate supplies to resume what they had begun. Patton urged his leaders to keep high the morale created during the offensive. Privately, he threatened to steal fuel wherever he could find it to get his army rolling again. He himself continued to deliver the pep talks for which he was famous, giving credit, instilling pride, urging his men to even greater deeds. Then the Green Line. What was left of these German divisions was mopped up by the very men their Führer had told them were not soldiers and would not fight. Again, the aggressor had made a slight miscalculation. The Third, having crossed the Meuse River, reached the Moselle. Now the Allied front ran all the way in a line from the Swiss border to the north. 7th Army patrols coming up from the south met patrols from the 3rd Army. The two armies were now linked up for the coordinated offensive to come. Metz was the next big challenge. It was central to the resupply operation for German forces. we bombarded them with everything we had. I remember watching some of the green reinforcements who joined us at Metz. It was funny to watch how safe they felt at first in a tank, but it didn't take long to convince them that Patton's rule to keep rolling makes sense. After seeing their first tank hit and burn, they began to get scared. But being scared didn't seem to be much of a handicap to getting the job done. Their job was to destroy the enemy, and they did a fairly good job even that first day. The plan had two phases: to destroy the enemy in Metz and to catch him as he tried to pull out of Metz. We were ready to make a deep penetration into the enemy's lines. Once we had crashed through the German defense, the left column was to advance east and seize a bridgehead over the Saar River near Merzig. The right column was to take the division objective, included Bosenville, which was the center of arterial highway and railroad traffic running northeast of Metz. The enemy blocked the way and fought savagely. But the Tigers clawed their way through the German defense. By the time the division had completed its first major offensive mission, it had taken 64 towns, repulsed 11 counterattacks, captured 2,000 prisoners, and destroyed great quantities of material. But Metz was no cheap victory. The fall of this highly regarded fortification bore out Patton's belief that no defense position had ever been successfully defended. With General Walker at the front, new plans now, a great drive toward the German border. Retreat for Nazi forces caught on the wrong side of the line was cut off. We rounded up our share of prisoners. The desperate plight of Hitler's armies became more apparent as the bewildered legions of a once mighty destructive force found themselves defeated by an army they had been repeatedly told would never last on the soil of the Third Reich longer than 9 hours. It was 97 days since the assault on Omaha Beach. Allied forces now drove across the border and stood on the soil of Hitler's Germany. Who was it that once said, "The American is no soldier"? Patton was proud, but an instinct for what the enemy will do next had alerted Patton to a new danger. On December 7th, Hitler approved the final draft of Operation Christ Rose, now renamed Watch on the Rhine. Hitler's plan of attack was to break through on the Ardennes with three armies. The 6th Panzer Army, led by the Bavarian General Dietrich. The 5th Panzer Army, led by General von Manteuffel. And the 7th Army, led by General Brandenburger. They would cross the Meuse River on the second day between Liège and Namur, bypass Brussels, and reach the great port of Antwerp on the 7th day. This operation, Hitler believed, would destroy more than 30 American and British divisions. He believed it would be the beginning of the end for the Allies. Within the next few weeks, thousands and thousands of troops and thousands upon thousands of tons of material were transported secretly from assembly areas to terminals just behind the front line. On the eve of December 15th, 250,000 Germans stood poised on the line of departure, prepared to annihilate the enemy. At 5:30 a.m. the following morning, flames erupted along a 40-mile front. The famous Battle of the Bulge had begun. The last desperate effort of the German war machine. Adolf wanted his boys to do or die. They ripped our lines wide open at the Ardennes. Field Marshal von Rundstedt struck with 20 divisions on a 40-mile front. Hitler's drive to Antwerp had begun. Patton was asked to speed what help he could. Could it be in 3 days, I asked. Patton's armored troops would make it in 2. Dashing 100 miles over icy roads to Bastogne. Terrible weather prevented a much-needed air attack. A religious man, Patton regularly prayed. This time, a prayer went out on thousands of printed cards for all his men to join him. Almighty and merciful Father, grant us fair weather for battle. Now the enemy was on the defensive. In Patton's book, they were destined to fail. The 3rd broke the back of the German offensive and began preparations for their own. Always, the old man pushed them harder than anyone had pushed them before. Always the results were more than they might have expected. For a commander who was so obviously a winner, they would do the impossible. Patton believed in decorations, in recognizing and exalting the heroic qualities of his men. And they sensed his sincerity when he used words like duty, patriotism, and loyalty. To him, these words had real meaning. The Siegfried Line. Now in Patton's words, this monument to the stupidity of man finally cracked easily. The famous 3rd was now on the loose again, on a spring rampage that would bring the war to a close before summer. One event I remember on the race to the Rhine concerns the destruction of the German supply column. With the aid of the Air Force, who had bottled up some German vehicles earlier in the day, we were able to destroy an entire German army supply train. This was recognized as one of the greatest concentrations of enemy equipment of the entire war. General Patton came down to take a look at this and said it was the most fantastic destruction of an enemy column that he had seen during the war. The Tigers reached the Rhine Valley in a little over a week, capturing in their drive 8,000 prisoners, heading off the escape route for over 50,000 Germans. Again, Patton's army was going beyond expectations. The enemy believed he would stop at the Rhine. Throughout history, wars have been lost because of armies not crossing rivers, he said, and he went right across. Now along a wide front, his divisions fought toward the final goal. Always he took time out to give credit where it really belonged, to the men. To Private Harold A. Garman, the Medal of Honor. Exalting sacrifice, Patton never dwelt long on the horrors of war. But as his Third Army overran concentration camps in Germany, he saw horror of a new kind. Victories piled up as the Third turned southwest to link up with Soviet forces in the Danube Valley. We've done it. We won. We could go home. I got busy writing my sweetheart and my mom to get that welcome home picnic ready. When Patton returned home, Americans showed their gratitude. In General Pershing's words, it didn't hurt America to have a general so bold that he was dangerous. Los Angeles went all out in its reception. With him was General Doolittle, whose 8th Air Force in Europe did so much to assure final victory.
Although no unit, no individual won the war, we're fortunate in having one here tonight with us who had a large part in winning the war. I'm pleased and proud to have been privileged to fight by the side of General George Patton. Your Honor, Mayor, General Doolittle, soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, coming over here, there was a very great lesson. The first 4 hours, we passed over a destroyed land, utterly destroyed. You who have not seen it do not know what hell looks like from the top. That's what Germany looks like. That Austria looks like. That's what any place that the 8th Air Force and the 3rd Army worked on looks like. You must remember this, that from Brest to various towns in southern Germany and Austria, whose names I can't pronounce, but whose places I have removed. The trail of the 3rd Army and the 19th Tactical Air Command and the 8th Air Force is marked by more than 40,000 white crosses, 40,000 dead Americans.
Few realized how deeply he felt about his men. Within a month of the end of the war, Patton himself was laid to rest, not from wounds of war, but from injuries in an automobile accident in Germany. The place of burial among the men of the 3rd Army who had fallen in the Battle of the Bulge. The general taught us as much about living as he did about fighting. He reached his dreams, and his spirit lives on in all of us who learn from him how to find the hero inside ourselves.
Before introducing our main speaker, I'd like to say this. The trail of fighting by the 45th Division put them at just about the top of Army divisions who suffered the most casualties. They fought in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, southern France, into the Vosges Mountains that during the Winter War of the Battle of the Bulge, in that southern sector, they had a German counterattack there in January 45. On into the central part of Germany where they fought a terrible battle at the Battle of Aschaffenburg, and we're going to hear a lot on that. Then Nuremberg, down to southern Germany, and ending the war by the concentration camp Dachau. Our guest speaker will take us back now to 1944, 1945. John, if you want to make your way up here, I'll just tell you a few more things. Our speaker is a local man. He was raised in Hartford, not too far from where we're sitting right now. After the war, he was an elementary school teacher and a principal. So would you join with me in welcoming a 3-time Purple Heart winner and a real American hero, a foxhole infantry soldier, John Russell. Give it a try. Can you talk close to that?
Sure. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Everybody here okay?
No.
No? Try now.
Now testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4, 3, 2, 1. Is that going to be better? Okay. First of all, a couple of things I was going to say Ken has already mentioned. I met Ken 2.5 years ago at the War Memorial in Milwaukee, and we kind of arranged this tentatively back then. It's finally come to a fruition, and I'm here with you tonight. I want to thank Ken. I want to thank the catering service, Ranties. It was a delicious meal. And above all, I want to thank you for giving up a night to come and hear me. As Ken said, I was born and reared in Hartford and finished the high school there. And upon graduation, I went to Marquette and we pursued a career in education and teaching. I substituted for a short while in Milwaukee and then entered the Army. In June, there was a gentleman here that talked about the induction cycle. And I just thought I'd like to share with you a little sidelight that isn't commonly known. So happens that this young fellow was going through the induction center, and the first thing you take is a physical. You want to find out what's wrong with you and what's right with you. And so some of the fellows were too happy entering the military, and they tried various devious methods of trying to find themselves physically unfit. They didn't realize they were one person, but the induction center was 10,000. They saw and heard all the excuses. However, at this particular time, there was a room like this. There were stations along here, each checking you for a different part of your body. This fellow came up this one station, and the technician said, "Now I want you to notice this chart up on the wall. He said, I'm going to point to a line of letters, and I want you to read it." So he pointed there, and can't see it. Well, cover your right eye. No, I can't read that. Cover your left eye. Well, he did that 2 or 3 different times. And he said, "Are you sure you can't read?" "Oh, I'm positive I can't read that." He said, "Well, I want you to just step to the next station. You just passed the hearing test. We'll check you for the second part." I entered the Army in spite of my hearing. I was assigned to infantry training at Camp Wheeler in Georgia, and upon completion of that, I boarded a ship in Norfolk, Virginia, headed east. The only reason we knew where we were going is the sun. Nobody told us where we were going. Nobody told us where we were going to end up or how. We're headed east. That convoy changed course every 8 minutes to avoid submarines. Fortunately, our trip was uneventful. And the only time we really knew where we were going was when we passed Gibraltar. And that told us the Mediterranean someplace, but didn't know where. It eventually ended up as Naples. Naples, Italy. Well, we debarked there and transported to the Volturno River Valley, which was known as a Repel Depot. How many of you know what a Repel Depot is? It's a replacement depot. We were chosen to be the honored ones to replace casualties of battle on the front line. It was there that was assigned to the 45th Infantry Division. Now, if you'll notice on your placemat, it's the Thunderbird. That's a symbol of the Southwest Indian tribes. And it's a symbol of good weather for plentiful crops. That became the insignia of the 45th Division in 1942, 41, excuse me, because the previous insignia was the swastika. That is, the swastika was a German, was an Indian symbol. And the Nazis adopted that as their logo. Well, we weren't about to run in competition, so they changed the insignia to the Thunderbird. When I was in Naples, or in Volturno Valley, they had been a member of the Fifth Army, which invaded Sicily and came up through Salerno, Anzio, and Rome. They were pulled back off the line along with the 3rd and the 36th Division to form the new 7th Army. That was to be the invasion force for southern France. Now, the overall planning was to divide and conquer. At this time, the Germans had to fight the Russians. Front number 1. At this time, the war was still going on in Italy. Front number 2. On the 6th of June of 1944 was Normandy. Front number 3. And we came into southern France on August 15th to form front number 4. So what it did, it created havoc with the German High Command to be able to supply manpower to 4 different fronts and material to 4 different fronts, because our Air Force took care of the transportation end of it, because they bombed the bridges and the highways, and it created havoc with transportation, both troops and material. This was all part of the overall planning. We entered southern France. It was the 5th amphibious landing for the 45th Division. They initially landed at Gela in Sicily. They had a second amphibious landing because of the particular situation in northern Sicily, and they had another amphibious landing. The 3rd amphibious landing was Salerno. The Americans went up the west coast of Italy. The English went up the east coast. The battle went on to Cassino. And that Cassino was an abbey similar to Holy Hill. It had command of the whole area around. You couldn't move. And it was an observation post. The only way they could get that was to bypass it. So the 45th and the 3rd Division went back to Naples and formed another amphibious landing at Anzio. That was almost the bloodiest, that and Salerno were the 2 bloodiest parts of the whole campaign. However, after 3 months, they were broke through and went up to Rome. There, after the fall of Rome, they were pulled back, and that's where I came in. They formed the 7th Army, along with the 3rd and the 36th Division. We entered southern France on the 15th of August, and nobody would have believed it. But the resistance was so minimal that we couldn't even believe it. And one of the biggest adjustments I made was the fact that up until this time, everything was simulated. This was hot ammunition coming back at us when they finally made a stand. And it was quite an adjustment to make. it showed some of it in your movie here just prior to my presentation. We moved 50 to 60 miles a day because of the lack of resistance up the Rhone Valley. This was one of the foothills of the Alps Mountains and Switzerland, between Switzerland and the Rhone River. One of our big problems was communications. Couldn't use the radios because they were bugged by the Germans. So they had to lay telephone wire. Can you imagine laying 70 miles of telephone wire a day and keep 3 divisions in contact with command that was also on the move? But in spite of it, we were able to survive, and with a few battles here and there, get up into Alsace, which is the eastern central part of France. One of the main communication centers is Epinal. And Epinal was a kind of a corollary with Strasbourg, the capital of Alsace. And in the clearing out of that city, I happened to be with a group that was clearing out the city hall, the burgomaster's office. And I went in and there was a German soldiers guarding the flag, just like that one standing right there. But it happened to be a swastika. And so I told him, you go and take that thing down and fold it up and lay it on the table over here. You didn't get within an arm's length for your own protection. So he folded it up, laid it on the table. I put it in my cartridge belt, and I carried it with me for about 5 weeks until we had a chance to mail it home. Today, that flag is laying prostrate on my television set as a cover. That flag has never flown or raised in arm since that day in Epinal. It has laid flat in defeat, and it shall lay that way forever. We went into a divisional rest in November. And it was just at the beginning of the winter season. Rain, cold, and I'm sorry to say, but the higher command thought the war would be over before the cold weather set in, but it wasn't. We went into a divisional rest and get re-outfitted with clothing and what have you, and a 10-day respite in combat. It just so happens that in 1944 we had 2 Thanksgivings. I don't know if does anyone remember that? 1 or 2, okay. What happened was Thanksgiving was on the 30th, the last Thursday in November, the 30th of November. And even though we were at war, business had to continue. And in those days, the traditional beginning of the Christmas season was the day after Thanksgiving, which it is today. But that would have been the 1st of December and only given people 3 weeks or better to do their shopping. So that's the one time that they had 2 Thanksgivings, on the 22nd and on the 29th or 30th, I forget when, of November. Well, the politics of war is morale on the home front. And the government, Roosevelt stood in front of the radios in those days, he didn't have television. He said, every GI in uniform will get turkey on Thanksgiving as long as it is physically possible. Well, we had turkey. And that was one of the first good meals we had other than K rations. Well, But lo and behold, we had some visitors. And the thing is, if you're on K ration for a while, your stomach shrinks, unbeknown to you. Then you get a meal and you can't eat it. Your stomach just won't handle it all. So we had more food than we could use. Who came in to visit us but 3 nuns from an orphanage? These kids hadn't eaten. They were living on water and just a bare minimum of bread. Asked if they could fill their pails with our garbage. That was their Thanksgiving gift. I can tell you that the second Thanksgiving, they were invited to come in and sit down with us. With our mess kits and their plates that they were told to bring. And each one of us had a kid to eat dinner with. Tell you, that'll make the toughest guys squirm. Just look at the satisfaction on those poor kids' faces. We no more than got through with Thanksgiving, and we went back into line. And on the 15th, as you saw in that movie, 15th of December was the Battle of the Bulge. The Bulge actually took place in Belgium. And the Germans used every last bit they had to get through to Antwerp, which was our main source of supply, the port of Antwerp, for the Northern Front in Europe. And it came up that, how are they going to stop me? And the High Command, there was politics there too. Montgomery and Patton were bitter, and Eisenhower were bitter enemies. And egotism was rampant. Montgomery was so concerned about the fact that the Americans were getting too much publicity, and Patton was living for it, and the Americans. Well, anyway, he suggested that let the Germans go. We'll pinch them off at the source. So by moving his army 90 miles north, as showed on that picture, the movie tonight, they cut off the Battle of the Bulge, and they were isolated, and they eventually ran out of food, fuel, and ammunition. When Patton was delegated to move his Third Army north to relieve the people at Bastogne. Now, your speaker last month was from the 101st Airborne. And as you heard of the movie that preceded me, Patton, by his troops, well, first of all, Patton was known as Blood and Guts Patton. And his troops interpreted it a little differently. His troops said, yeah, your blood and my guts.
Yeah.
But Patton was quite eloquent, in spite of the fact he was a rough and tough guy. And when he was moving forth up into Belgium to relieve the 101st Airborne in Bastogne, which had been surrounded, and prior to that, the Germans set an ultimatum to General McAuliffe, the commander of the 101st Airborne, and says, we'll give you one chance to give up and save your lives. And his answer was as eloquent as Patton. His answer was, nuts! And that was the answer he gave to the Germans. Well, they survived, and Patton went up and reinforced the 101st in Bastogne, and they defeated the Germans at that point. And Patton referred to the 101st Airborne as the Battling Bastards of Bastogne. And I think that was a very appropriate name, excuse the vernacular. That's why I said I'll quote it. We entered Germany on the 15th of December, just at the time of the bulge in the north. We were in the south, in Alsace, just between Alsace and Germany. We pulled into a little town by the name of Aschaffenburg. I mean, a little town that they were leader Schroeder.
Help with that microphone, just to readjust it a little bit.
What?
I think it's off, Ken, it's off.
Oh,
Turn it on.
hello? Are you with me?
No.
There you go. There it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Into a Niederschlottenbach. Well, all hell broke loose. We didn't know what the hell it was. But we were in with the first house that we come into the town, and we were in what the living room. And lo and behold, right outside, not 20 feet away, was a German soldier, 2 German soldiers and a German officer. He set up a machine gun right out there. So there's only one way to do it, and we didn't want them to get back to give any information, so I told 2 or 3 of my men, I said, each one of you take one of those guys, aim a little high because it's too short a distance for the line of sight on your rifle and the barrel to come together. So shoot them a little above their head. I'll count 3 and they all fire at the same time. When we dropped them. But where the hell did they come from? They just appeared there out of nowhere. So a couple of my men said, let me take a look and see what's going on. They discovered a trench right up behind this house, and then a steel door and a cement enclosure. What the hell is that? That was our introduction to the Siegfried line. These were pillboxes. And they were all connected, 13 of them around this little town, all connected by this trench. And they could go from one to the other. There was a door here, and a door here. They could go right through and then to the next one. Well, we called for the tank destroyers to lay in a couple of rounds. Didn't phase it. Machine guns kept going. We tried called artillery. Didn't phase it. So these couple of my GI friends said, well, let's try something. So they went up there and rapped on the door. No answer. They went up and looked, and here is a kind of an air vent on the top of this pillbox, which took care of a little stove they had in there and ventilation. And the only other was an aperture out of which the machine gun was covering this whole area. And I told you there were 13 of them around this town. They got a smart idea. And they dropped a hand grenade down that air vent. Oh boy, did that ever take care of it, I'll tell you. And when they came back, so we went up, about 8 of us went up, and we leapfrogged. 3 on one side, 3, one at the front door, one at the back door, one on top. And they dropped it, and then the next group would come, and they would take the next pillbox. The third group, the third pillbox. That way, we cleared out that whole town as far as the pillbox was concerned. And our introduction to what the Germans wanted Siegfried line was going to have in store for us for the future. We were only no more than got finished destroying these pillboxes, and word came down about the Battle of the Bulge at Bastogne. So we were out on a point, and the thing was that back in your geometry class you learned that the closest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Instead of being up and around like that and defending a U-shaped area, They straightened out the line. And we had to move up and take over part of Patton's territory that he evacuated to go up to Bastogne. So instead of a division covering 5 miles of the front, we covered 15 miles. So we had 3 times the area to cover. We were moved from this Niederschlottenbach to a defensive position until they could give the overall strategy of how they're going to handle the bulge up in Bastogne. And that was at Christmas time. The temperature hovered between 10, 12 degrees and 25 degrees. Did you ever see an overcoat among those men on that picture we just had? We had field jackets. And we froze. And I mean froze. In fact, just yesterday I was at the Veterans Administration because I don't have any feeling in my legs. And they call it neuropathy. But it's a big word for getting froze and nerve damage as a result of the wet, cold conditions. We had the luxury of 4 days in a barn from the 15th of December till the 7th of January. All the rest was in foxhole. We had you might call it American ingenuity. We take off our boot one at a time, put it between our buddy's legs, and they crouch to kind of warm the bare feet, the stocking feet, and then he would rub the calves in my legs, just to create circulation, because trench foot was rampant. And trench foot is the result of cold, freezing conditions that inhibit circulation. And our boots, we didn't have the shoe packs that they came later on, and they're like sorrel boots, you might say. That's what we call shoe packs, with the felt lining. But our leather boots were soaking wet. And just to take them off and warm up your feet, massage them, and then reverse it. He would do mine and I would do his. And then back to the cooling off again. We were there in between Christmas and New Year's. And on New Year's Eve, or New Year's Day, I forget what it was, a platoon leader, Lieutenant Moore, passed a bottle. He must have got a ration. The officers got a ration for liquor. And he passed it. We went from one foxhole to the next. He shared it with us. And ironically, about 3 years ago, his niece wrote to my division, and they put it in the newsletter. She was looking for information about him. And I developed a wonderful correspondence with her to kind of relive her uncle's life as he experienced combat. And that was one of the things I shared with her that he shared with us. So we did have a drink on New Year's Day, but there was little respite because the fighting continued on. So it eliminated the overall planning to get the southern part of France and Strasbourg and Alsace. Our unit, our 45th Division, received a presidential unit citation for the Battle of Wingen, which was on January 7th of 1945. It so happens on that day, I was wounded in through the shoulder. And the medic took a look at it, put some sulfur on it, and said, "You know, you're lucky." He said, "That was a tracer, or it was a tracer bullet. And I saw it coming, but I couldn't get out of the way." And the medic says, "Oh," he said, "you're lucky." He said, "You know, that was hot enough to go through, and it wasn't, so there won't be any infection. And because of it, that it was hot, it cauterized, so you aren't going to bleed, so continue on fighting." Isn't that encouraging? So I did. That afternoon, about 2.5 miles away, 8 kilometers, we ran into another battle as we pursued the retreat of this SS group, and I got another one in the leg. Well, that was just before dark, and I was evacuated back to a hospital in Sarburg, where I received surgery for both wounds that night. It's after a short period of recovery, I was transferred by rail to Paris to the 108th General Hospital, and from there out to a convalescent hospital. It so happens that when I was in the convalescent hospital, my aunt from Town Erin wrote me a letter. And she said, "If you ever get near the 108th General Hospital, look up Eileen O'Connell. She's a nurse there." Oh, and Eileen and I used to date each other here before the war, and she was from Chicago. She came up to visit here during her dad's vacation. So I looked her up, and sure enough, we had some real fine times in Paris during the course of my stay at the convalescent. Does anyone know what a convalescent hospital is? Well, I'll give you my own personal definition. It's basic training under medical supervision. Yeah, basic training. After lollygagging for 2.5 months in the hospital, they wanted to put me back in shape so I could go back up and fight again, which I did. By the way, talk about old soldiers never die. I suppose I can't find it now. I want it.
No, John, during the question and answer period, we can do that reading. How's that?
Okay. So anyway, I survived the convalescent hospital enough to get put back into physical shape and back up to the front. Just in time on March 18th, 19th, to rejoin the 45th Division as we prepared to cross the Rhine. We went across there in these little outboard motors on life rafts, you might call them, oversized life rafts, and we assaulted at Worms, France, or Germany. We proceeded to Aschaffenburg, and when we were coming into Aschaffenburg, there was an arch, and here was a German officer hanging by his feet with wire from that arch. You know this. So one of the natives told us, he made kind of a statement to the effect that they might as well end the war right there because it's just a matter of time and casualties. They had no chance of winning the war. And because of his disloyalty, they hung him by his feet and machine gunned him, hang him there. It was a disgrace to think that he would think of surrendering. We proceeded from there to Bamberg, Germany. Oh, we had a hell of a battle at the airport there. And we left there, and as we were going in toward the central part of the Bamberg, Germany, we had to clear out warehouses and buildings and so forth. We came across a catch of cognac. Holy crap, I just can't believe it ever happened. So, what we did, in our five of us, it was all that was left of the squad at that time. 12 were normally in there, but there were only 5 of us left. It's a wooden carton, and then they have straw socks that they put over so that when they bounce against each other, they don't break. And so I looked in, took a bayonet and opened it up, pulled it out, and there was a guard there. A German officer was a German soldier was a guard in the place. So we pulled the cork out of it, asked him, "Is it any good?" "Good?" "Oh yeah, it's very good." Okay, poured some in a canteen cup and said, "Okay, if it's so good, you drink it." Put the cork back on. The reason that always somebody has to make a sacrifice, you get a little smarter. Some of our men died because they hypodermic needled these cork bottles and put poison in there. And you couldn't tell it, but they didn't last very long after they took a drink. So we found out of it and learned the hard way. Somebody else had to die to educate us. So what we do is we pour it in the canteen cup and let the guard drink it. And if he would drink it, we knew it was all right. Well, it just so happens that we were belting a couple of them as we finished the capture of Bamberg. And a little German kid comes up and says, "Roosevelt dead." Get the hell out of here, kid. Come to find out, the 12th of April, 1945, Roosevelt died. And that's how we found out about the President of the United States dying. A German kid comes up and tells us. Well, we proceeded on to Nuremberg. And it took us 4 days to take Nuremberg. And unfortunately, I lasted for just short of 4 days. Because on about noon, on April 20th, I picked up 2 rounds from a German machine gun through my midsection. And that put an end to my military fighting. I was evacuated to what they call a field hospital. It's a little more familiar to you to calling it MASH, because in Korea they called the field hospital MASH. The acronym for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, MASH. And the hospital was organized in 3 units, 3 complete separate units. And there would be one set up right behind the front line to accept the most seriously wounded soldiers. There was a next second one was packed and ready to go. And the third one was getting packed. So what would happen is, as the front would move forward, number 3 would move up into number 1. Then what would formerly number 2 would get their patients ready for evacuation back to general hospitals and start packing. As the front would move forward, they would jump over and into the front position and set up. And it was a leapfrog, one after the other that way, so that they could stay within 3 to 5 miles behind the front. I was in the field hospital for approximately 8 days, and I had recovered enough to warrant air evacuation to England. I landed in England on the 29th of April, and on the 30th of April was the last day of combat in Europe. It took until the 8th of May for them to find somebody of high enough stature in the German government to be able to be authorized to sign the final surrender. They did that in Reims, France on May 8th, 1945. While I was in England, my aunt, the same aunt that told me about the nurse in Paris, wrote a letter to her son, Charlie Russell. He was a Liberator pilot with the 8th Air Force. And you know, I'll tell you, he came down to see me. He hitchhiked. And I'll tell you, when I saw somebody from home, and one of my loved relatives, it was the best medicine I got. It was a psychological lift I can't describe. After that, I came home in a hospital ship. I was transferred to Percy Jones General Hospital in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I was there until December of 45, where I received my discharge, and that ended my military career. And now, if you have any questions.
A lot of questions. First question, when you were hit in Nuremberg, did you see the machine gun that hit you? Was
No.
it close by? Okay.
No.
What were you men advancing upon at that time when you were hit on the 20th at noon? What was your objective? Was it street fighting, house to house, or
Street fighting, house-to-house fighting, yes.
do you have any detail on what that's like?
Well, what you do, the thing is that you never knew what lay ahead of you. And curiosity killed the cat, and it'll kill you too. So you were extra cautious. But by that time, we'd kick open the door and see what was inside. If it was a larger building, oh, that's another thing. We had an M1 rifle and 8 rounds in an M1 and one in the chamber. And you never got caught with an empty magazine. So if we went to 6, 7 rounds, we'd eject and put in a fresh clip because you didn't want to get caught without ammunition in your weapon. And so what we'd have to do is fire a couple rounds in the building, wait for a response. If not, we'd go in, see what we find, clear it out, and move to the next building. That's what happened with our brandy catch. We didn't want to do too much destruction. It was too good a drink. But you know, it was every situation was just a little bit different, and it was just house to house fighting. But I might just mention that one of my squad, one of the men in my squad at that time, did find the machine gunners that got me, and he brought one of the men's watches to me, and as a kind of a souvenir, but I never did see it again because I went through the medics and hospital and I lost everything I ever had.
John, that wound cost you what? All of the lung or part of the lung, or what was the extent of that injury?
It perforated the lung and they took out one lobe, and went through my ribs, took out 2 ribs, and part of my intestines.
Did it knock you out? Did you lose consciousness?
Not right away, no.
Okay.
No. After I had a little morphine, I was in God's heaven on earth, you might say.
I have a question. You mentioned just briefly that battle at Aschaffenburg. Now, Aschaffenburg is very close to Frankfurt, and from my reading of history, there were SS troops there, they had a training barracks, and Hitler Youth, women and men all turned out to defend that town. Would you tell us more specifics about that battle of Aschaffenburg?
Well, the thing is that you could identify the German soldiers. They had uniforms just like we did. But the thing is that even the civilian population were supplementing the German forces with hand grenades and so forth. So you could trust nobody. You'd be walking down the street and a hand grenade would come out of a window. And it's just the luck of and the good Lord that brought many of us through the situation. Little kids, similar to what you see on today's news broadcast. Anything for the Fuhrer. And they sacrificed their lives so that they could maybe survive and defeat us, but they just was a hopeless mess. But the civilian population was supplementing the military by using devious means to destroy us.
Let's open it up. Stand and state your question.
No, I just wanted to say the current World War II issue magazine has a picture of the SS man hanging by his boots at Schaffenburg.
It does?
It's got an article on the 45th Division. It's really good.
So that's World War II,
World War II magazine.
and that is November or October issue, or you don't know?
I think it's
November.
November, some others have seen it, okay.
I have a copy of a World War II magazine at home, and it's rather ironic, but there's an article in there about my division. And what it said was General Fredericks, Bob Fredericks, was our commander. And he had been formerly the commander of the 1st Special Service Force, which was a forerunner of the Green Beret. World War II version of the Green Beret. He would make Patton happy if Patton could just meet him and work with him, because they were two of a kind. After the war, he was in a gin mill in San Francisco, and he looked very young for his age. However, he was quaffing down a couple of drinks with a couple of his buddies, and he had these 3 stars on his shoulder and on his cap. And the policeman came in. And this is in World War II, an article in that same magazine you're referring to, but a different issue. He said, "Let me see your ID." And the general gave him his ID, Bob Fredericks. And he looked at it, he says, "Damn good imposter," threw it on the ground. Fredericks says, "Pick that up and return it to me." He said, "Would you like to make me?" With that, he landed himself right on his chin and laid him cold, this policeman, right on the floor. He wouldn't believe that the general had enough fighting experience to be able to challenge him. He picked him up by the nape of the neck and said, "All right, now pick that thing up and hand it back to me like a gentleman." And that's the way he lived his life, and that's the way he expected us to be. So it gives you a little idea of what took place on the front line.
More questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Although you were wounded and out of your unit at the end of the war, was there any scuttlebutt that they were going to send your division or similar divisions over to Japan?
No. My division was not scheduled for the redeployment to Japan. They were, as far as I know, they were taken back to Oklahoma and deactivated out of Oklahoma City and McAllister, Oklahoma, which were two of the the home bases of the division. But there was, at that time, there was no plans to send the 45th to Japan.
More questions out here?
I might just mention a couple things. Oh, I must compliment the organization here. You know, I never looked this good before in my life. I don't know really what they did in my picture. Photography does wonders.
While you're searching through that, have you kept in touch with your buddies and reunions and so forth from your old division?
No, there are none of them left. I did for a while, yes, but there were none of them left. I had a copy of an invitation here. I can't find it now. But anyway, this last December, I received an invitation to come down to Chicago and carol with a group of friends. And among those friends was Eileen O'Connell Byrne, who was the nurse that I met in Paris, and we still maintain a contact to this day, and as late as last December, but I wasn't able to make it down there. But that has been an annual affair to come down and have a party at Christmas time, and she was the nurse that I met in Paris.
John, I got another question for you.
Yeah.
Out of all the fights you saw, what was the toughest one that you recall? Was it in the Alsace or Aschaffenburg, Nuremberg?
No. On the morning of January 7th, the date I got wounded the first time. My assistant squad leader and I shared the foxhole for approximately 2 weeks. And that morning, the Germans had killed our machine gun crew. And he jumped out of that foxhole, went down, manned the machine gun, and he laid them up like cordwood. Only to have someone break through and drop a hand grenade in that pit and kill them. When your buddies leave you, it's a terrific loss. This is the invitation that I was going to mention to you about this last December. Come to Chicago and rejoin this nurse with her family and friends to celebrate Christmas. One little sidelight that I hadn't mentioned is V-mail. Have anybody heard of V-mail? Here's the lady over here. V-mail is the forerunner of microfilm. And you would write a letter, and they would take a picture of it, put it on a reel, send it back to the States, print it out, and this is the size of a letter. You would get, and all to save space and be able to deliver more mail, because mail was a very important thing as far as service was concerned. Anything else?
One last Bruce question over there.
Forgive me if I missed this, but did you get drafted or did you enlist? And then what year and month was that?
My draft number, my serial number was 3625-7395. You can always tell. 0. If your serial number begins with 0, you're an officer. Number 1. If it starts with 1, you're an enlisted man. Number 2. If your serial number begins with 2, you're a National Guard or Reserve. Number 3, you're a draftee. And I was a draftee. Anyone else?
Please stand up.
Sir, would you compare your experience with what you feel is happening and they're experiencing in Iraq right now?
Yeah, you don't know who your enemy is. At least we knew who our enemy was, but now you don't know. They're terrorists. And the thing is that you have to throw the book out the window and use yesterday's experience in today's activities, because there is no book written on terrorism. Because every time you write a book on something like that, they'll come up with a new type of terrorism. One is an airplane. Next one is a car bomb. The next one is a person coming with a bomb on them. How do you know? So you're fighting an enemy you can't see. And that's rough. That's very rough.
Another hand, Jim?
I don't have a question. I just got to thank you for what your service was yesterday, for allowing us to be here today. None of us would be here. We would probably all be speaking German or Japanese if it wasn't for the people of World War II. So thank you.
Other questions? If not, do you have any closing comments here as we draw our evening to an
Yes.
end?
I want to ask you to come up here. I need some help. I don't know if any of you ever heard about this or not, but this is going to be a duet. I have two stories for you. I'm going to have one, and Ken's going to have the other. I always kind of like to leave you on with a smile on your face. Story number 1. Many years ago, Al Capone. How many people knew of Al Capone? Okay, all right. Must have drinkers.
Nice guy.
Virtually owned Chicago.
Great.
He wasn't famous for anything heroic, but was notorious for embellishing the Windy City in everything from bootleg booze, prostitution, to murder. Capone had a lawyer named Easy Eddie. Eddie, legal skill and maneuvering kept Big Al out of jail for a long time. He was paid well, plus special dividends. For instance, Eddie and family occupied a fenced-in mansion, occupying an entire square block, fully staffed and convenient, very convenient. He lived a high life of the Chicago rich and the Chicago mob, and paid little attention to the atrocities going on around him. However, Eddie and family, Eddie had a son whom he loved dearly and gave him the best of everything: clothes, cars, good education, no limit. And despite his involvement with organized crime, Eddie tried to teach his son right from wrong, to be a better man than he was. However, he couldn't pass on a good name or a good example. He made a difficult decision to go to the authorities and tell the truth about Al Capone, Scarface, and to clean up his tarnished name. He came forward and testified against the mob. But within the year, Easy Eddie's life ended in a blaze of gunfire on a lonely Chicago street. But in his eyes, he had given his son the greatest gift he had to offer, at that greatest price he would ever pay. That's the story of Easy Eddie.
Back here.
Oh.
You want me to finish part 2?
No, yeah, please.
Okay. Story number 2. World War II produced many heroes. One such man was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, a fighter pilot assigned to the carrier Lexington in the South Pacific. One day his entire squadron was sent on a mission. After he was airborne and checked his fuel gauge, he realized someone had failed to top off his fuel tank. His flight leader told him to return to the carrier ASAP. Reluctantly, he dropped out of formation, headed back to the fleet. His blood turned cold as he spotted a squadron of Japanese aircraft speeding directly towards the American fleet. The American fighters were on their sortie, so the fleet was all but defenseless. Somehow he must divert these enemy aircraft from our fleet. Putting aside all personal safety, he dove into the formation of Japanese planes, attacking one surprised Japanese plane after another. Butch dove in and out of the now broken formation and even continued to assault after his ammunition was all but spent by using his plane as a weapon. Finally, the Japanese squadron left in another direction. Deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare, in his tattered plane, limped back to the carrier. He reported in and related the event. The film from the gun camera mounted on his plane told the true tale, the extent of his daring attempt to protect his fleet. He had in fact destroyed 5 enemy aircraft. This took place on 20 February 1942. And for this action, Butch became the Navy's first ace of World War II and the first naval aviator to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. A year later, Butch himself was killed in aerial combat at the age of 29. His hometown would not allow the memory of this World War II hero to fade, and today, O'Hare Field in Chicago is named in tribute to the courage of this great American. The next time you pass through O'Hare Field, check out the memorial displaying his entire his statue and his Medal of Honor located between Terminals 1 and 2. So, what do these two stories have to do with each other? Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. John, thank you. You're dismissed, and if anybody has a placemat they want signed, you know how it's done.
Yeah, she enjoys it so much up there. I asked her yesterday, I said, when's she coming home again?